It is absolutely one of those things to where, and I'm a big believer in this, you can write the most complex, adult-oriented, and I say adult-oriented, I don't necessarily mean just in terms of the rating, but just even in terms of like complex themes, all the way down to the same basic children's concepts. And I'm using, relatively simplistic terms to describe this, though I could absolutely go into the more dynamic themes that we see and shows like Arcane and shows like, the Chosen, all the way down to shows like Bluey, which are definitely up there in terms of the same quality that you're going to get Arcane at, even though they're completely different shows, because it all utilizes the same overarching system.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have another great author on the podcast. And we're going to go deep. We got a lot of things to cover. And this amazing guest is going to help you tell better stories. He's going to help you on your journey as a writer, as a creative person. Isaac covers it all. So Isaac Phoenix, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm always excited to be able to come out and talk about like the one thing on the planet that I'm good at and, be able to connect with people who really are able to kind of get this stuff and help them progress their journey forward. So I am excited to be here for sure.
Awesome. So our audience, Isaac, we have authors that are listening who are early days of writing their book, doing their project. They have a couple words down on a piece of paper, a thought, and they're just starting. Like they don't know anything about anything, and they're here to learn from you, to kind of draft in on your experience and kind of take in some pointers and some guidance that you could give to a new author. And then we also have readers who are here just to fall in love with an author and fall in love with their next great book. So it's kind of a mixed combination of people listening to the show, and I kind of want to direct our attention to them. So let's start with the authors that are listening. Tell us a little bit about your author journey. Like, when did you start writing? What was the thing that got you curious about putting words out there into the world as a content creator?
Yeah, so I have been a gamer my entire life, or at least as far back as I can remember. Was not born with a controller in my hand, but definitely adapted to one later. My parents were not as encouraging of it as I have tried to be with my kids. And I think that part of my love of gaming has stemmed from them not being as encouraging, because me trying to be more encouraging with my kids has had the opposite effect. But I started off with that, and I knew that I wanted to be a game designer growing up. And I, studied it through high school and realized that I can't code worth anything, which is a very important aspect of being at least a programmer, maybe not a designer, especially with the tools we have now. But I really wanted to make sure that I could specialize in what I was trying to do. I actually left the gaming industry when I first started off to end up getting into childcare, child development, that type of stuff, aspects of psychology. But I ended up wanting to come back. And so I really wanted to specialize, and I ended up doing narrative design, where it's, partly you are writing for video games, but the other part of it is designing the narrative, like literally just in the title. And what that comes down to is, how do you best share this moment? Do you utilize the music? Do you use the art? Do you use the mechanics? Do you use the story? What exactly are you putting out? And what was great about that job is that I literally got to figure out how to avoid doing my job. How can I make the artist tell this point instead of the writer? How do I make the mechanic, the coding team tell this part instead of me? And it's literally your job to get out of doing your job, which was a whole lot of fun. But during that process, it was exhausting trying to communicate between different writers on the team, between different, game programmers who were like, hey, I developed this awesome thing, let's put it in the story. And then all the writers were like, please don't make us do this. And so I was usually the one who was running point between the teams, and I would go through and explain why someone could or couldn't do this. And it ended up leading to me writing a paper called The 3 Dimensions of Story, to where, for me, I really wanted to find a way that I could communicate with everyone. And I developed my own narrative structure that was kind of a cross between the 3X structure and the 5X structure. And it gave me enough in terms of communication to bring everyone together. So then I ended up getting pulled into a transmedia team where we were working on a TV show alongside of a game. And during that time that I was there, I started working on a book that was a more enhanced version of the paper called the 3 Dimensions of Narrative. And that is a book that is out. And in fact, I will send you the link as well because it is freely available, but I don't push it because it is currently outdated because I'm working on my next book. But most of what
Okay.
I've written, most of what I've developed in this is all about narrative structure. How is it that we can take a story and really make sure that everything we're doing has meaning involved in it?
Okay. All right. So unpack narrative structure a little bit more for us. Again, for a new author who's like, oh, I need to know more about this. What's kind of the framework then?
So we have been utilizing narrative structure for a very, very long time. Aristotle put some concepts out for us. The biggest one right now is The Hero's Journey, put out by Joseph Campbell. Really made famous after George Lucas brought attention to him because during his time in film school, he read that book, which is really what saved that first Star Wars film that he made. Dan Harmon's a very famous writer who developed a lot of this stuff. And I pulled a lot of different information from a lot of people in the narrative field, but also in the psychological field, in a whole bunch of different places. But the core aspect for me that I think is probably the most important to know is probably the least structured in its approach is that every single moment in narrative is an emotion, a behavior, a belief, and a value. It is something happens to us and we have an emotional reaction and then we do something because we believe that it'll get us closer to what means the most to us in that moment. And that is really, for me, whether you're writing, whether you're working on a movie, narrative design, that to me is the key part. And I think what I would pull that from the most is from the idea of a memory. Every memory you have is based around that same core principle. I don't think that you could find a memory to where these four things are not infused in some way into that memory. And the most powerful memories are the ones that have the most motivation and got us the closest to our goals.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you have examples kind of how like Dan Harmon would write or the structure in like what we would see on television or anything? Do you have any examples of his work?
Yes, absolutely.
People have used that as a framework?
So, you're talking about writers who are just putting words to paper. And I think that one of the interesting things is that once you kind of put those words down onto the paper, it is about how do you kind of get that stuff to kind of continue to spread out? How do you get that to move forward? So I do utilize Dan Harmon's work in this. And the overall premise, at least to get started, is that there's usually about 7 beats in a scene. And a beat is that smallest element of narrative. So it is that emotion, behavior, belief, and value. And that first beat is about explaining who the character is. So it starts off with you develop the emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values. And later on in the middle of the story, when you've already established their emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values, you're going to have one of those, at least, that has changed from the last time you brought it up. So they might be happier or frustrated. And so that initial change is a key aspect of that moving forward. And so that is the first aspect. The second one is to help define what exactly it is that they want, because that want is really what's going to help drive them forward. It's that behavior that's going to get them closer to that value. The third one is to define what exactly it is that is getting in their way, what exactly it is that they need to do to come in and get closer to that want. And once you do that, you see what their drive is. So, just as let's go classic rom-com example, the boy wants the girl, right? If they go after her, we know that whatever that is what he values. But if he refuses to go after her, that is a value and a behavior as well, because what means the most to him is not her, it's his own self-image. So you progress through those first 3, and then the fourth one is about, hey, there is something that is standing exactly between him and her, between the character and the goal, and they are going to fight whatever they're going to do to overcome it. And then that fifth beat is them obtaining what they want. So this is kind of key because you think, oh, well, that'd be towards the end. But no, they obtain what they want in this fifth one, because then you get to see how it changes them in the sixth beat. That beat is about saying, hey, this is their reaction to getting what they want. And that seventh beat, that final beat, is how they start to treat others because of their change after getting that one. So a big classic narrative thing is that, hey, you'll have want versus need. The character wants to get this, but they need to get this, which changes their want. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that they went through and they thought, hey, one of the things that's really important to me is to not feel alone. So I'm going to go ahead and get with this particular person, and then I won't feel alone. But then they still end up feeling alone. And they still feel alone because this person is not like them. They don't understand them. They're not the ideal person for who they are. And so because of that, everything that they thought they would be happier, they thought they'd be more excited, but it just ends up turning them into someone who is agitated all the time because something is wrong, but they can't pinpoint what it is. And then if they end up finding someone else who understands them, who gets them, who they want to be with, that is what drives them towards their need to feel like, hey, being alone is not being with someone, it's being with someone who understands you. And that really helps set up the core thematic aspect of everything you're looking for in your story.
Okay. All right. I like that. I like the understanding the beats better. That's a great way for authors and any writer really to kind of map out where they're heading with their character development as well. Is there anything that you're seeing out there in the world where you hear something that's maybe a popular opinion, but you're like, for me, that doesn't work as much in what I do?
Yeah. I mean, we could do quite a few podcasts on that subject alone. So putting together that beat and then putting those beats together to create a scene. One of the things that I then say is, okay, there's 5 scenes that you can put together. These scenes are a need, a conflict, a resonance, a connection, and a value. And the way that it works is I pull out Abraham Maslow's needs for that first one. So that first scene is you have a character who, I'll pick the fifth one. The fifth one is about understanding. It's about understanding who you are. And the conflict for that, actually, no, I'm sorry. So the conflict for that one is about responsibility. It's about being forced into a particular corner to where it's say, hey, you're responsible for this. But you need to be understood for who you are, not just what you're capable of doing. And so because of that, you end up getting to that middle part, that resonance, which is your identity. And that identity is what allows you to understand who you are. You cover that initial need. And through that, you gain a connection to freedom. You are now free to be who you are because you understand. And you're not backed into a corner by other people because understanding who you are allows you to move forward. And then that last one is the value. And I utilize Erik Erikson's value system for this. So that last value is the value of fidelity. It's a loyalty to yourself. So you no longer have to be responsible to others. There's still obviously, it's good to be responsible. But when other people try and force that responsibility onto you and try and manipulate you in that way, when you are free to take on your own choices and your own responsibilities, it comes from stemming from who you are and creating a loyalty to yourself. Because if you're not loyal to yourself, other people will be able to rope you into being loyal to who they are. So I bring that up. And these segments, there are 7 segments that I put together back to back. They're trust, agency, play, validation, identity, intimacy, and generativity. I could go into all of them in great detail as well. But your original question about what are one of the things that you put that I would push against, and it's the entire idea of writing what you know. One of the issues with the 3X structure, and I say issues as if it's an issue, you can actually map out everything that I do alongside the 3X structure. It's a huge influence for me. But that there's so many people who, instead of utilizing archetypes, utilize tropes. And the same thing is true in this statement. So many people are like, oh, well, you need the supernatural aid, which is one that's particularly bad in video games because you get this epic weapon that kills everybody and everyone gets so excited, right? But everyone loves the lightsaber from Star Wars, but the lightsaber was never used in the first movie at all. It became a cultural icon because it represented character, who Luke Skywalker was going to be. It represented the world through how, the lightsaber represented freedom in the Old Republic and the Jedi Order and everything that they stood for. And it represented the story. It represented character because it was his father's lightsaber. And then it represented story for everything Luke was supposed to be. And so the meaning behind what it is really the important part. So many people come in and say, write what you know. And they'll utilize this as a way to say, oh, well, if you've never been through this particular thing, then you won't know what this is like. And that's something that's used politically in a lot of like biopics and stuff. But the reason why I bring that up is because especially when you're diving into something that is more fantasy oriented or something that you've enjoyed the world building aspect to it. It's one of those things to where you end up knowing, writing what you know means going through the experiences as each of those 7 segments, of knowing what it's like to trust somebody and then to have that trust lost, of knowing what it's like to look for the decisions that is going to make your life better, of looking for the ability to explore and play and not feel trapped because you need to figure out what you're supposed to be, where your path is, of that validation stage of feeling like that imposter syndrome where we're all stuck in this one spot, and accumulating those wins to give you the confidence so that you can adapt to that identity. And then through that identity, connecting with others like you who represent the foundation of who you are. And then the generativity, which is about giving back to the world based off of what you developed over the course of your story. And everyone's gone through those stages. So writing what you know is often a way for people to push back against people who have not gone through specific circumstances. But I think that one of the, and we see this in terms of like how story influences others through politics, through economics, through all of these fields that seem so different from writing books and video games. And it just comes down to the fact that we all have those same experiences, but they're all packaged so differently and so uniquely that it separates us. But if we actually know how to tell the story at the core of who we are, we create connections through people that we'd never assume would be like us.
Okay. All right. So in addition, what are some other key elements to story that help us to build that bridge between what's in our mind and what's where we're trying to build to the reader or the viewer? How else can we kind of reinforce that connection, that bridge between us and those that are going to see our content?
Well, one of the first things that I push is the beats that I discussed before, the behaviors, emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values. And one of the reasons why I push that is because I have specific categories that I separate things out into. So for the emotions, joy and sorrow is a category, fear and excitement is a category, anger and generosity is a category, and trust and disgust is a category. And one of the reasons why I bring this up is because, especially I do branding work as well with some of my narrative aspects. And I push the idea of utilizing one of these sets because it allows you to really connect with people who share those same emotions. And I really push that in terms of the writing and reading as well, because when you get a character who is very upfront about how they feel and very much pushes the actions that make it to where, hey, this is who somebody is, you get characters who will instantly connect to particular aspects of the audience because that emotion is one that connects to particular behaviors, beliefs, and values. And so we all have access to all of that, but there's certain aspects of us that are stronger in some of those regards than others. And so when you put out a character who's just overly happy in a particular way, we get that character who gets to connect to people who are more extroverted, who are more joyous, who are able to pull things together. And that's definitely one of the first things to do. But especially considering the fact that a story is about change, I talk about how you have the beats that lead into the scenes, that lead into the segments, that lead into the story. And the next thing that I would say is when you have a character who is utilizing an emotion in a particular area, and you get to see the conflict stage come up, that is easily represented by another character who, instead of, having that joyous side, could be on one side, could say, hey, I am, the opposite of you. I am very upset. I'm very introverted. I represent the opposite of what you are. And then through that, and we're talking about this, relatively simplistically in terms of emotions instead of the more thematic elements of a story, but, representing the opposite of who they are. And then you get to put them in these scenarios to where you kind of get to prove who is right and in what regards they are right. Or in terms of Inside Out, which is probably the best media representation of a lot of what I teach, you get to see where they can balance themselves out at, where each aspect of who we are is a part of that. And I think that that's part of what a story is that, in a way, a story is about a collection of characters, but we have that collection of characters in our own heads. And this is kind of a fantastical representation of how those characters come together and battle against each other in order to prove which aspect of us is best utilized in a normal situation that is still kind of similar to this fantastic rendition that we've produced. So creating those conflicts and those connections that show what parts of ourselves pull each other out and what parts of the world, of other people, can help bring us into where we need to be is a big aspect of that. But, I mentioned that you have a story, but I teach narrative design. And the real big difference between story and narrative is that story is an individual aspect or an individual character, idea, relationship that goes through those 7 stages. A narrative is a collection of stories. So when you write a book, you write the story about the protagonist, but you'll have a chapter that's the background of a villain, or, a romance that's developing that develops over 3 distinct, books for a trilogy or something like that. And so really the key there is to sit back and say, okay, I'm going to take this character who's going to represent a conflict to this character or a connection to the main character. But then from there, I can say, what is this character's emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values? How can I develop their story? And then when you do that, you can then cross it and weave it through everything else. And then you get a couple of side characters who only pop in once. And that's where the beauty of transmedia comes in, or even the beauty of just a franchise. Even if you only write books, the beauty of a franchise is that you can take one character who had one moment and fully develop out that story the exact same way you did the protagonist.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then it also then supports your main story, goes back and helps build that world, right? As you develop those characters even further. I love that.
Yeah. And, you bring up world development, and it is one of those things where the world very much encompasses the entire narrative, but it's also kind of funny to see. And I think that politics is probably the best real world example to where 2 people can look at the same exact scenario and see 2 completely different things. And part of it's because they have different accesses to information, but part of it is because they come in with different belief systems. So, I told you that there are 4 sets of emotions. There are 4 different types of beliefs that we have. There's analytical, which is trust-based. Someone told me this, I fully believe it. There's sequentially based, which is I have habits, they lead to this, the result, and it's very binary. It's almost like a computer to where if this plus this is this, you turn on the transistor. And so they just develop habits and behaviors, and it'll lead to this or it won't, and they can switch that on and off. Then you have imaginative belief systems, which are very much narrative. A lot of narrative people will have these because it's about putting together patterns that some people won't necessarily see with different aspects. I teach branding because, in terms of narrative, it utilizes the business aspect with the narrative aspect to create deep, intimate connections between the business and the fictional character that is becoming the business and the audience, the same way you'd have a fictional character in a book. And then the last one is emotional, right? They make decisions based on the emotions that everyone will be impacted on. So when you're designing a world for the main character, when you design a separate story to help enhance that world, you're not only enhancing the world, but you're also seeing it from a very unique point of view. If you have someone who sees the world as sunshine and rainbows all the time, you're going to have another character too, even if that's a literal sunshine and rainbows, you're going to have another character who's like, it's either way too hot or way too rainy. Because in order to create those rainbows and to have the sun that big in the sky, it's got to be hot and rainy all the time. So you'll get to kind of see the other side of what that looks like from another character's perspective and how they deal with the same or even different story elements within that world.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a bunch of Care Bears writing a book. They're all different perspectives.
It is absolutely one of those things to where, and I'm a big believer in this, you can write the most complex, adult-oriented, and I say adult-oriented, I don't necessarily mean just in terms of the rating, but just even in terms of like complex themes, all the way down to the same basic children's concepts. And I'm using, relatively simplistic terms to describe this, though I could absolutely go into the more dynamic themes that we see and shows like Arcane and shows like, the Chosen, all the way down to shows like Bluey, which are definitely up there in terms of the same quality that you're going to get Arcane at, even though they're completely different shows, because it all utilizes the same overarching system.
That's right. Yeah, now that it's kind of like when you go to buy a red car and then you see red cars everywhere. As we hear you talk about those, now we're going to look at our favorite stories and go, wait a minute, that's what Isaac was talking about right there. I can see the pattern now that we are mentioning here on the podcast.
And, it really does come down to, for me, studying narrative structure was how I got started in this. I wanted to sit back and say, I'm tired of saying I have to choose one of these or one of these. I want to create one thing that encompasses all of them. That's where I started. But then as I kind of progressed further in, I was like, okay, well, your memories will work like this, or this is how your life is kind of run. And so, looking at psychological aspects kind of as proofs for this kind of drove me to sit back and say, yeah, I am here to help, to talk about this stuff. But at the end of the day, as much as I can sit here and talk about all this narrative structure, one of the cores that you're going to have, and this goes back to the thing that I debate against, right? Writing what you know. It comes back down to writing who you are and realizing that your life had that need, conflict, resonance, connection, and value that has all of those segments. This is just my tool is not necessarily a tool for writing. It's a tool for mapping out your life and your subconscious. And then your subconscious is the tool for writing, because that's where you're going to get the clear, most vibrant pictures moving forward that add so much depth to the fantastical, epic world building that you're pushing forward.
So, okay, I've heard many authors come on and talk about their writing, and they find themselves losing floor space. They're writing themselves into a corner, and they're going to get trapped in their journey as an author. And then they just rely on, like you talked about, the lightsaber, the special, weapon, or the special casting a spell or something to get them out of that situation because they wrote themselves into this really interesting predicament. How do we not get to that point where we have to rely on these tools to escape maybe how we've written ourselves into the corner? Do you have any tips on how to think more broadly so we don't end up in that situation as a writer?
Yeah, well, so the thing that I would do personally is that I would structure out everything. And, I honestly, this just probably comes from my laziness because, I'm willing to write a first, second, third draft. But if you're sitting there working on draft 15 to 20, like it's too much. And really what that comes down to is structuring out your novel to sit back and say, how does this stuff work? And so many people hate that. And I understand why they hate that, right? Because on one hand, it can feel very reductive. But then on the other, they're just writing the plot points down because they've been utilizing these structures and again, love Joseph Campbell. But, these structures are very easy to take literally. For me, when I outline, it's a far more in-depth process because, I'll write down the idea of what I want. I'll divide that out into 7 segments. I divide out each segment into 5 scenes. I divide each of those scenes out into, and it's not even 7 beats because those 7 beats are just for the protagonist. You're not even counting the times where, hey, they're supposed to succeed on this beat, they lose, so they have to go back a beat. You're not counting the beats from the antagonist. You're not counting the beats from the other characters. And I break all of that down, and then I break those beats down into the emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values. Why? Because if there's a beat that doesn't have a strong or connecting one of those, then it needs to be cut because you're losing meaning. And so when you get these authors who write themselves into a corner, I would sit back and say there's probably a reason as to why they're writing themselves into the corner is because they're not feeling that strong connection, or there's a moment that's missing those aspects. So on one hand, I very much say use structure, plan it out, but I also know that it can be reductive. And so for me, I'm like, start off with a blank piece of paper and just write, and it doesn't have to be the story. Just write out everything that you want because there's 3 levels of inspiration. The first level is self-inspiration. It's I went out to a park and took a walk and I got inspired to create the game Pokemon because I saw a lot of bugs out there and wanted to go bug catching. The second level of inspiration is I saw what someone else did and I wanted to do something like that, right? So I played the Pokemon game and I made Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh or all that other stuff, right? And I added my own unique spin on it, not just in terms of it like, the world building and stuff, but also in terms of who I am and what I wanted to add into that. And then the third level of inspiration is self-inspiration. And if you're part of a writing team, it's like, hey, I want a story about a dragon. And then someone else says a purple dragon. And then someone else says their name. And so you can kind of utilize that as the whole team is bouncing ideas off of each other. But when you write something down, it becomes more realistic, which can be dangerous. I've heard that like if you tell too many people about your ideas, you'll get those dopamine hits, which means that you won't do the actual work because you just are striving for those. But overall, it is helpful to be able to write something down, to be able to talk to somebody, because once it's out there, it becomes real. And once it's real, you can then play off of it. I do exercises, and one of them is just a word map where I say, okay, write down one word, circle it, and then draw off in a distance, and write every word that you can connect to that. And then do that again for a third level. Draw off more lines and write words that connect to that second layer word. Then cross lines between all the words that have connections. And the words that have the most lines, write them down and start putting that together, because that is clearly what's on your head. That will help you not necessarily write per se, but it'll help you create the connections you need to get things flowing. But on the other side, right, it's very easy to sit back and say a Deus Ex Machina is very bad. But they were used for a very long time. And the reason they were used is because, especially back during those times, it was, humans bad, gods good. Gods are going to have to come in and save you because you're a pathetic mortal and you have no idea what you're doing. We don't have that anymore. And I think that that's very important. If you look back at the old cave drawings, it was very much story centered. And like, this is a list of things to do. This is how you kill the elephant. This is how your ancestor killed the elephant. Here's some motivation. Then you get into, the plays and the aspects to where it is very world based. You still got some of that story based with the fables and everything, where it's like, hey, if you go through and you try and eat a witch's candy house, she will take you out. But there was a lot of those like Deus Ex Machinas came in because it was not just the story about the events. It was about how do people react to the world around them and what's going on with that. And now we're coming in here to this age of like, we've conquered the world, we understand the things to do, but who we are changes that. And it really helps encompass what story is. But coming back in for a Deus Ex Machina is not always a bad thing. If you write yourself into a corner where a character is just completely and utterly stuck, and to use the best example I can think of, if you were to utilize some kind of, coming of age story where a teen's supposed to do this and this and this, and you write yourself into a corner, there's no shame in having a parent or someone come in with the Deus Ex Machina, because there's a representation there to sit back and say that who they were cannot beat the world. And it's okay to have them step back. Zootopia is a film to where Judy Hopps goes through and is validated for everything. She's put so much effort into everything she's doing, and she's validated, but she doesn't get to that identity stage because she feels like she broke the world instead of helping it. And, her boss gives her that great line. It's like, the world's always been broken. We're just trying to do the best that we can. Like, this is not on you. But Judy Hopps walks away until she figures out that, she's given the answers for the, the crimes that are going on. But during that process, it's not just like a blueberry farmer comes in and says, oh yeah, well, this is what's poisoning everybody. Instead, it's her childhood bully who was a predator. And it gives her the ability to sit back and say, hey, this is not just the answer for the story. This is the answer for who I want to be. So it's always okay to have that Deus Ex Machina come in. Don't be afraid of writing yourself into a corner. When you strategize everything out, you'll realize that you're going to write yourself into a corner less, but you'll also figure out that there's going to be times where it's not going to click into place, and it's perfectly okay to bail yourself out with a cheap trick if it has some meaning to it.
Okay. Wow. All right. Before we hit record, we mentioned just chatting too a little bit around the topic of AI. Now, I have authors that I've spoken to on this podcast who struggle with imposter syndrome. Like, who would ever want to read my book, or would ever like to hear what I have to say in my writings? And then you add on the complexity of AI in the sense that it can do everything for you. It's great. You just click a button and then here's your book. 10 seconds later, you're an author. And it's like, well, now I have to compete against AI. I have to compete against my own fear that I'm not good enough as a writer. So now I feel like the cards are stacked against me, that I can't compete against myself or technology. Do you have like a flag that you wave around AI, that you promote AI as for authors and writers? And do you have the opposite? Do you have a word of caution for us as authors and consumers around AI and how it's impacting the space?
Yeah, so I'm very pro AI. I am very, very, very much pro AI. I'm pro technology in a general sense, and AI is absolutely one of those things. But before I get into why, I teach narrative branding classes, and I do this because I started off in this narrative space, and I developed this narrative structure. And one of the books I'm currently working on is this idea of how do I take this narrative structure and apply it to all these categories. My first stop here is with branding. It is because I kind of already did with creativity, though I want to go back and kind of fix a few things. But my first stop is branding. How do I apply the exact same structure that I talked to you about with branding. And one of the things that I do is I say, okay, we're going to develop a product narrative, which is an emotion, behavior, belief, and value. So for me, I help people develop their narratives. So that's the emotion and the behavior right there, because the deep emotional connections it creates allows you to grow your business through the impact you're having on other people's stories. That is my belief and my value. Yep. And that's it. And so then what I do is I use a consumer's narrative, which is the same thing I use for a scene, the need, conflict, resonance, connection, value. Businesses who trying to grow their business will utilize all the old business techniques and all the fast tracking systems to grab leads and to use conversion techniques. But when I help them develop their story, they actually know where to find the leads that share those same emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values, which make the conversion significantly easier, and then move you from being a slimy salesperson to being someone who, no, I'm offering you a product that's going to change your life story. You are the resonance in the middle. So, for me, I am helping a business move from business-oriented tactics to narrative-oriented tactics. I am that middle beat. But what's important is not my product. What's important is that they connect with their ideal clients. That's the connection side. And the value side is that love that they get. Their business is loved by everyone else around them. And it's loved by themselves. They kind of get to reapproach everything. So I bring that up kind of to talk about, trying to hit up narrative and all these different approaches, from branding all the way down to mental health. And in terms of imposter syndrome, I'm not really a business person. I ran some sales jobs. I was actually pretty good at them, but I'm not really a business person. I haven't loved the whole process. I really love doing the research and setting everything up and even doing the recordings. I mean, as you can tell, I enjoy talking too much. Yeah. But it's terrifying throwing this business up there, because that's not really who I am or what I am. I'm the storytelling guy, but I have to sell my product to other people to make money. And that is exhausting and terrifying. And it's not really me. And in terms of imposter syndrome, it's something that I have. But the reason why I'm in this space is because there was a hole to fill. Because, sure, we've had branding in the past, but some people think branding is just a logo. Other people are like, well, it's how people consider your business. I'm like, no, it's how you create deep connections through these 4 things. I developed something in narrative, I brought it over. There was a hole to fill. So when you're sitting there and developing a product, when you're sitting there and writing your book, there have been things that have influenced you, sure. But you are writing something because there is, for someone out there, a hole that has not been filled. And that is what you are doing for yourself. Mm-hmm. You are writing a book for yourself for that hole that hasn't been filled. So the first thing you have to recognize is that there are other people out there just like you who need to hear this story. So recognize beyond the imposter syndrome that just because other people are excited for what's already out does not mean that people who don't know you exist will not, when you're done, after it's marketed, after it's sold to them, sing your praise on high more than some of these billion-dollar franchises. And you might not ever be that billion-dollar franchise, but you may be worth more to enough individuals to put money in your pocket, to them, to their lives, to the guides that your characters were, than any of these other massive franchises could ever be. So that's I guess the first thing is to talk about imposter syndrome. In terms of AI, I think that there's a bit of a misconception that is pushing one button and just being done. Is that possible for it to be the case? Yes, absolutely. But I think that really does come down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what AI is. AI is not here to do things for us because it messes up all the time. We give it all this information and we're supposed to be like, oh, yay, look at that. It can give us any answers we want at any time, but we still have to ask the right questions. I mean, if I were to hire a ghostwriter, a human person, and say, hey, I want to write a story about a cat who's stuck up in a tree and their owner's trying to get something for them, a ghostwriter is going to write something that may be a little bit better than ChatGPT, but I gave them nothing to go off of. If I sit down and say, okay, I want to write a story about an owner who lost, who lost their significant other, and this cat was the last thing that was left for them, and this cat is stuck in a tree, and they have to go and get him, but they're terrified of heights. you're all of a sudden adding so much more to the story. And, honestly, I'm sitting here, trying to come up with a ridiculous, dumb description, talking about imposter syndrome again, about like cat stuck in a tree. Who cares? That's kind of how John Wick starts. He gets a dog from his significant other who is taken out, and that makes the entire franchise taking place. So even the most ridiculous ideas have more of a place than you can possibly realize going forward. But when you utilize AI, and when you utilize it right, not as something who can do something for you, but as a full-out partner, you will be able to put so much more in there. People say all the time, oh, well, AI doesn't have the heart and soul of a human. Yeah, but a human can communicate the heart and soul of what they're trying to do to the AI. So it's not particularly concerning to me in terms of everything that's going on, because it can be harder to break into the market. But honestly, it's been harder to break into the market since the printing press was invented. And now we have Google Docs and self-publishing and Amazon KPD. I mean, all of this stuff has made it simultaneously harder to market yourself and easier to get into the market yourself. And so I think that the key here kind of comes back down to, again, what I teach, which is branding, right? You create a story with a structure in order to make sure that this works. How do you market yourself? Utilizing that exact same structure moving forward. You have the skills. If you have the skills to write, you have the skills for everything else that goes along with it. But overall, I work with AI. I love AI. I very much push it. And one of the things that I'm developing that will hopefully be released sometime in the near future is not something to where you click a button and all of a sudden you get this whole story. It's something to where I give you a blank document and you are allowed to put out words, you're allowed to put out images, you're allowed to put videos, anything you want. And the AI system is going to grab all of that. And it's going to throw stuff into an organization and pile. And then what you do is you can also like request help from the AI, where they're going to ask you particular questions, or they're going to give you little things that'll help inspire you, and you can choose to accept them or turn them down. Then when you go to the organization side, you'll see that all this information has been filled in for everything you could possibly need. And then you can choose to add more, correct stuff, take stuff away. And then you get to the writing side, to where you can maybe at this point, because there should be a lot of information about characters, world, story, everything, push a button to form it all together. Because again, it's not just like, hey, I just typed out a sentence or two and then it was done. It's like, no, I had fun in the most, epic way, just imagining all of this stuff. And it organized it for me, and now it can write it for me, or I can write it, and it can help edit it. It can help do all this stuff. So the goal of AI is not to remove the workload from people. A lot of people will talk about this, how, motivation versus discipline. But the funny thing is that I think that AI is supposed to remove the need for discipline. And it's not like discipline is a bad thing. And it's not like it's the only thing. But if you're going to sit down and write a book, the most fun you're going to have is the world building, is the imagination, to where you're just having a blast writing stuff down. It doesn't have to make any sense. It's not connected at all. And then you have to go through and you have to organize all of it, which honestly, for me, that's a fun part too. I enjoy the puzzle-like aspect of it. But not everyone enjoys that side. And even still, then, while the writing side can be fun, it's one of those things to where when you've done all the imagination and then you've done the organizing and then you're working on a first, second, third, fourth draft, it becomes very overwhelming, especially if you cannot seem to get it right. But the AI being there as a partner to help inspire the imagination, to help organize all the incongruent facts, and then to help edit the final product that you're putting out is not a one button click. It's designed to be there to help you. And then from there, you can find your niche going forward. I mean, people don't buy one book and then they're done. They buy a lot of them. I mean, your background is a perfect example right there. So overall, you will absolutely find your niche. And AI is not there to do the work for you. It's there to help you find inside of you the things that you need to move forward. And again, that's what story structure was not supposed to be this step-by-step guide of, well, I need a mentor and then I need a supernatural aid, I need a threshold guardian. No, what is a mentor character, right? And this is a problem. So many people fall into the trap of writing a trope. A mentor figure is a bearded old white guy. No, it comes from the trust segment. The trust segment is you have a character who needs to feel cared for emotionally, physically, mentally, but the world does not putting the effort in. It's the world puts the survival of the society over the individual. So they would put that character to death, and this can be physically seen in like old tribes, but it can be seen in modern day stuff to where it's like, oh yeah, but you really should go to school to be a doctor instead of being a creator. So we get to see the emotional side of some people being put to death. And then that resonance comes in and they create a bond of trust with that character in order to help them say, hey, that side of you, that life you're looking for can be alive. And then they connect with that part of themselves and they gain the value of hope. They realize, hey, there's someone here who gives me the value of hope. So what is a mentor character? It's a character who creates a bond of trust, who gives the tools in order for the main character to have a sense of hope for the future. That's what a mentor character is. And that to me is really what AI is supposed to do. The same thing that structure is supposed to do. The same thing I'm trying to fix with structure is it's not a step-by-step checklist. It's not a one-button push. It's designed to help you find what's inside of you that is the real story. And then through that, be able to give you, to help supplement all the parts that of yourself that are not as strong. So, if you're not as strong of an animator as you are a writer, or if you're more into sound design or more into the art side, how can you still find that story? And AI can help you do all of that moving forward.
Wow. Isaac, there are people that are listening to this and going, I got to listen to this episode again. Like, I got to go back and hit play again because there's so much that you're putting in front of us that I don't think I've heard as concise and as organized. I can picture as you're talking, this leads to this and this leads to this. And mentally, I can see what you're saying. That's the sign of a person who's really good at story and mapping things out for people. You're demonstrating it while you're telling us how to do the thing. So I'm like right here with you the whole time. I love this.
I'm really glad to hear you say that because, again, going back to imposter syndrome, the class that I give, it's I run a lot of videos and then there's like a consulting coaching gig. So hearing that, you never really know until things kick into high gear how well you're doing. So even though that this is not, my branding videos, hearing on camera that I'm doing this well is really nice. And so that's absolutely something, in terms of imposter syndrome, that's a great thing to do is that find something else that's not what you're doing that's similar enough to see if you can get positive feedback on, because then you know that naturally you're going in the right direction. So I really appreciate hearing that from you.
It's amazing. Okay, so Isaac, there's people here at the end. They're going, okay, you filled my cup, Isaac. It's running over with all this amazing information. Now I need to work with you. I really want to be in your world. You talk about these courses and classes and things that you teach. I need more, Isaac. What does that look like? What's a starting point for working with you, and kind of how do we do that?
I really wish that I had a full answer. And it's funny because you bring on people who are authors, and that's how we connected. I'm like, I've written a book before. And, right after that book was done, I'd be like, yeah, come into this email address and we'll chat or, get this book and all this other stuff. But I'm in the middle of so much right now that I'm trying to figure out. And in my mind, I'm like, well, once I finish all this, I'll definitely be able to help everyone at every point in time. But I've said this like 5 or 6 times before. So very clearly, as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to find something else to do. But right now, I sell branding classes. I will include the link, overall within that description. It's one of those things that's, talking about AI. It's one of those things that is, done through, for me, it's done through Wix because I very much struggle with the web design aspect of it. But, it's one of those, the link itself is the creativecontinuum8.wixsite.com/narrative hyphen branding. That being said, I know that your audience is a lot of writers, and so this stuff is something that I push more towards corporations, but I am always happy to help where I can. So my email address is myauthenticbranding, MYAUTHENTIC. I have to make sure I'm going all the way through it. And then branding, BRANDING.com, at gmail.com. So those are ways to reach me. I'm sure it'll be in the description as well. But I'm always happy to sit down and chat narrative and help out where I can. that being said, I'm planning a lot for the future. This book is going to be massive. It's going to be something to where I'm hoping to help not only creatives but multiple industries through the same exact area. And working with AI, again, not something that's here to destroy jobs, though inevitably it will, and that bites. But again, removing a $60,000 to $80,000 job is heartbreaking. But for me, I see it removing a $5 to $10 million barrier to making a movie. And so, that's really the end game. So I'm hoping that outside of being happy to help people out right now where I can, that in the future, very soon, the tools will be available to really give people the ability to really maximize out their strengths and really understand who they are and be able to take that and put content out that'll really help shape other people's lives the way that the content we have now has shaped theirs.
It's amazing, Isaac. Thank you so much for doing this, Isaac, and making time to kind of unpack all this for us. And I just feel like we can go so much deeper with you and having you as a resource and all the materials you're putting into the world. It's very generous of you to share your knowledge with us. I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast.
Happy to be here. Really grateful that, for all the people you've had on that you've brought me on, and always happy to be able to, chat to someone who enjoys the only thing that I'm good at.
I love it. And stoke that flame a little bit too. I'm sure you're going to walk away from this going, I got more work to do now.
Oh, for
this
sure.
Is great. I love it.
For sure. It's never ending, but it's also enjoyable. It's worth stepping away and taking a break, but coming back, realizing why you started this in the first place is absolutely key to moving through the difficult times.
Okay, everyone, that amazing voice you've been listening to all the way through here, Isaac Phoenix is his name, and you definitely got to go check out everything that he has. We'll have all the links in the show notes. Lots of great stuff coming in the future as well. So this is a person you need to keep your tabs on this person, because there's some great stuff coming for all of us in the future. Isaac, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for checking out the latest episode of Living the Next Chapter. I'm so happy to bring on these amazing authors and to share their stories, but I do have to confess I have a problem. And people who know me best would say, Dave, you have more than one problem. My problem is I have more episodes than I can release to you through my audio host, but I have a solution for you. Oh, yes. Head over to our YouTube channel. Subscribe today to our YouTube channel, and you can get the most recent episode. I'm posting this episode today that I recorded today, and you can get it now on YouTube. Jump the line, move right past that big burly guy at the door. You can get right in and get the most recent episode of Living the Next Chapter on our YouTube channel. Make sure you go there. livingthenextchapter.com has all the information. And again, I want to thank you for making this podcast such a great joy to create. Catch you on the next one.